I am Rebecca Thompson, age 28, and this is the story of the Christmas that ended one chapter of my life and quietly began another. If you had met me a few years ago, you might have thought I had a fairly normal family. We weren't perfect, but from the outside we looked close. Sunday dinners, Christmas photos, family group chats. But behind the smiles, there were cracks that most people didn't see. My mother, Evelyn Thompson, was the kind of woman who needed control. Every decision had to pass through her approval. Every success anyone else had felt to her like a competition. I used to think her harshness came from love, that her criticism was her way of guiding me. But over time, it became clear it wasn't about care. It was about power. My older brother Michael was her golden child. Everything he did was celebrated. His promotion at 31, his marriage to a perfect woman named Elise, even his taste in wine. And me? I was the one who used to have potential. That's how she described me after I decided to switch careers. I had been studying law but left in my final year to become a teacher. Something that made me genuinely happy. She never forgave me for that. She told her friends, Rebecca threw her life away to play with crayons. At first I ignored it. You get used to family disappointment after a while. You learn to stay quiet at dinners, to avoid triggering those subtle looks, the ones that remind you you're the mistake they keep trying to fix. But that Christmas, it was supposed to be different. It was the first one I'd attended in 3 years. I had been living away, teaching in a small town upstate. My fiancé, Daniel, had convinced me to come back. He said it was time to make peace. I was newly pregnant, about 12 weeks. And though I was nervous, a part of me wanted to believe that sharing the news might heal things. Maybe this baby could bring us together. We drove down to my parents' home on December 24th. Snow covered the road, and the Thompson house looked exactly as I remembered. Polished, perfect, intimidating. My mother loved hosting. It was her stage. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon candles filled the air. There were garlands, lights, gold-trimmed plates, the kind of Christmas she'd post online for her friends to admire. When she saw me at the door, her smile was polite, but her eyes flickered with something colder. "Well, look who decided to come home," she said, her voice sugar-coated with disapproval. "Hi, Mom," I replied softly. She hugged me briefly, then turned to Daniel with exaggerated warmth. "Daniel, so good to see you. You poor thing dealing with our unpredictable Rebecca." He laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to say. We entered the living room where Michael and Elise were already sitting by the fireplace, sipping wine and watching some holiday movie. My father, as usual, sat quietly in the corner reading the newspaper. He wasn't cruel, just invisible. Years under my mother's dominance had made him shrink into silence. Dinner started smoothly enough. There was laughter, clinking glasses, polite conversation. I thought, maybe it'll be okay this time. Then came dessert, and with it, my announcement. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly, and said, "There's something I'd like to share with everyone." The table quieted. My mother's fork paused midair. "I wanted to tell you all. Daniel and I are expecting a baby." For a moment there was stillness. My father smiled faintly. Michael raised his brows, surprised. And my mother, she froze. Her expression didn't shift for several seconds. Then she let out a soft, cold laugh. "You're joking," she said. "No," I replied gently. "We found out last month. I wanted you to hear it from me first." Her eyes narrowed. "And this was supposed to be good news?" "Of course," I said, trying to keep calm. "I thought you'd be happy." She set her glass down with a soft clink. "Happy? Rebecca, you're not married yet. You quit law school for some low-paying job, and now you're bringing a child into this mess?" The air went heavy. I could feel Daniel's hand tighten under the table. "Mom, I'm engaged," I said quietly. "And I love my job. We'll be fine." "Fine?" she repeated, scoffing. "You think fine is enough for this family? You think I want my friends to know my daughter couldn't even finish her degree before—" "Evelyn," my father interrupted softly. "Please, not now." She ignored him completely. Her voice grew sharper. You've embarrassed us enough, Rebecca. I tried to help you, to make you into something respectable, and this is what you give me. A grandchild born out of... Mom, I said, my voice shaking now. Please stop. But she didn't. She leaned forward, her tone venomous and calm. You are not part of this family anymore. Do you understand me? I don't want you or that bastard in this house ever again. You're dead to me, and just so you're clear, you're out of the will. The room went silent. My brother looked away, uncomfortable. My father looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the strength. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and all I could think was, she really said that. I felt Daniel stand beside me, placing a hand on my back. But I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was something deeper, a kind of quiet, painful clarity. I had been trying to win her approval for 28 years. Every choice I made, every time I came home, I wanted her to see me, to love me, to be proud. And now finally I understood she never would. I nodded slowly. All right, I said softly. I understand. I picked up my coat and purse. Before leaving, I reached into the gift bag I'd brought and set a small box on the table in front of her. Merry Christmas, Mom, I said. And then I walked out. We drove back in silence. Snow kept falling, covering the road in white sheets that blurred into the dark. Daniel didn't say much, and I didn't ask him to. There was nothing to explain. I cried quietly, not because I was angry, but because something inside me had finally broken, something I had been holding on to since childhood. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages, even a voicemail from my brother. I didn't answer. I just sat on the edge of the bed staring at the phone, waiting for the numbness to fade. When it didn't, I walked to the kitchen, made tea, and waited for the news I knew was coming. Around noon, Daniel came in holding his phone. His expression was half shocked, half worried. She opened your present, he said. I looked up, calm. And? He hesitated. Your brother said she screamed. Like, actually screamed. He said she almost fainted. I just nodded slowly. That gift wasn't expensive. It wasn't cruel, but it carried truth, something my mother had spent her whole life avoiding. Inside that box was a photograph, an old one, of her and me from when I was about 6 years old. We were sitting by the fireplace, the same one from the dinner, both smiling. On the back, I had written in neat handwriting. Once, you said I was your greatest gift. I wish you'd remembered that before deciding I wasn't worth keeping. And under that, folded neatly, was a copy of a letter from my lawyer, one I'd written months ago but never mailed. It stated that I was renouncing any claim to her estate, to the will, to any financial connection to the Thompson family. I had signed it and dated it a week before Christmas. It was my way of saying, you can't take away what I already gave up. That was my quiet revenge. Not shouting, not fighting, but letting her face the truth she had, tried to bury under control and appearances. But that was only the beginning, because the story of what happened after that Christmas, the way things unfolded in the weeks and months that followed, that's where the real revenge began. And it wasn't loud or cruel. It was calm, thoughtful, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to win someone's love and start living for yourself. The day after Christmas, everything felt eerily quiet. The snow outside had stopped, leaving a soft white blanket over the world, untouched and still. I sat by the window of our small apartment, hands around a cup of tea, watching the light crawl slowly across the floor. It felt strange, peaceful, yet heavy. Daniel came into the room and sat beside me. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I smiled faintly. Like someone who just ended a war she didn't even know she was still fighting. He didn't respond right away. He just took my hand, squeezed it gently, and said, "You did the right thing." But doing the right thing doesn't always feel right. It felt like grief, not for my mother necessarily, but for the version of her I had once believed existed. The mother who used to braid my hair before school, who kissed my forehead when I was sick, who called me my sunshine. I realized that maybe she had been real once, long ago, before control and pride hardened her into someone else. I didn't hate her. I just felt done. The following days passed quietly. I got a few messages from my brother Michael. The first one said, "Mom isn't doing well. She's furious and embarrassed. Dad's trying to calm her down." The next one, "I don't know what you wrote in that letter, but she's obsessed with it. Keep saying you've humiliated her." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. A week later, on New Year's Eve, Daniel and I went for a long drive to clear our heads. We ended up at a small diner just off the highway. It was one of those places with red vinyl booths and twinkling Christmas lights still hanging along the windows. We sat there for hours, talking about our future, our baby, and the kind of parents we wanted to be. "I don't want our child to ever feel unwanted," I said quietly. "Not for their choices, not for who they become." Daniel nodded. "They won't. We'll make sure of that." And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. A few weeks later, I went back to teaching. My students, a group of 8-year-olds with endless energy, didn't know anything about what had happened, and that was comforting. They were loud, messy, and pure in a way adults rarely are. Every day I stood in front of that classroom, I felt grounded again. Teaching wasn't just my job, it was my sanity. One afternoon, while packing up after class, my phone buzzed with a call from my father. I hesitated before answering. "Rebecca," he said softly, his voice thin. "It's Dad." "Hi," I said cautiously. There was a long pause. "I just wanted to hear your voice. Your mother, she's been difficult lately." I didn't respond. "She didn't mean what she said," he added quickly, though his tone lacked conviction. "You know how she gets." "Dad," I said gently, "she meant it." He went quiet. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "She's not well. Ever since Christmas, she's been different, nervous, paranoid even. She keeps saying people are talking about her. About that letter," I sighed. "I didn't send it to anyone. She's doing that to herself." "I know," he said, "but she can't stop replaying it. She's telling everyone you've turned against her. She's lost control." That word, control, lingered in the air between us. "I don't want her hurt," I said finally, "but I also can't go back." "I understand," he replied softly. "I just wanted you to know that I miss you." We said goodbye, and I hung up. That call stayed with me for days. It reminded me that even though my mother had chosen pride over love, there were still people tangled in her web. People like my father, who had spent years quietly enduring her storms. About 2 months after Christmas, I started getting messages from mutual family friends. They weren't accusatory, just curious. They'd heard rumors. Apparently, my mother had told people I'd left the family because of some inheritance dispute, painting herself as the victim. I didn't bother correcting anyone. People will believe whatever fits their comfort, but something about the situation stirred something in me. Not anger, but resolve. If my mother wanted to rewrite the story, then I would quietly write my own truth. Not to fight her, but to free myself completely. So I started keeping a journal. Every day, I wrote about my family, my feelings, my experiences growing up under her shadow. It wasn't for revenge at first. It was therapy. A way to put things into words I had never said aloud. Over time, those entries began to form a picture of something much bigger. A pattern of emotional manipulation, control and fear that had shaped not just me, but everyone around her. I started realizing how many choices I'd made out of guilt or obligation, rather than love or freedom. One evening, Daniel read one of my entries and said, "Rebecca, people need to hear this. You're not the only one who's lived with this kind of pain." I thought about it. I didn't want to expose my family, but I wanted to help others understand that letting go, even when it hurts, is its own kind of healing. so I started writing essays online under a pseudonym. Simple reflections about family expectations, emotional boundaries, and finding peace after toxic relationships. I didn't use names, but my words came from truth. Within months, those essays began circulating widely. People from all over commented, saying things like, "I thought I was the only one," or "This helped me forgive myself." Ironically, my mother found out. One of her friends must have sent her a link, recognizing pieces of our family story. Michael called me, furious on her behalf. "She says you've ruined her reputation. She's embarrassed at the country club. She thinks everyone knows it's her." I stayed calm. I never used her name. If people see her in those words, that's not my doing. He fell silent. And maybe, deep down, he understood. That was when I realized something. Sometimes revenge doesn't have to be planned. Sometimes it happens naturally, when truth finally meets daylight. While my mother fought to preserve her image, I was building something real, a quiet life, grounded in honesty. By spring, my essays had been picked up by a small digital magazine. They asked if I wanted to publish them as a series on healing from family trauma. I agreed, but only if they remained anonymous. I didn't want fame or drama, just the satisfaction of knowing my pain had purpose. The series did well. I received dozens of messages from people who said my words helped them make peace with their own parents, or walk away from situations they thought they were trapped in. And in that process, something shifted inside me. I stopped waiting for my mother's apology. I didn't need it anymore. I had my closure. Still, she couldn't leave it alone. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting on it was unmistakable, my mother's. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no warmth, just her familiar cold, neat script. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Stop writing about your so-called trauma before you destroy what's left of our name." At the bottom, a line that almost made me laugh. "Remember who raised you." I folded the letter back carefully, slid it into the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But that night, as I sat alone in the nursery we were preparing for the baby, I felt a strange sense of peace. My mother's anger no longer reached me. It was just noise now, distant, powerless. Months passed. My belly grew. Daniel and I moved into a small house surrounded by trees and birdsong. I painted the nursery soft yellow and spent evenings reading aloud to my unborn child. Meanwhile, my father called occasionally, mostly to check on me quietly, as though he didn't want her to know. Each time his voice sounded weaker, but also lighter, as if my mother's control was losing its hold on him too. Then, one day, he told me something that caught me off guard. "She's been asking about you," he said softly. "She pretends she's angry, but I can tell she's ashamed. She's been reading those essays. She knows it's you." I didn't know how to feel. I just said, "That's her choice, Dad. I can't be her secret lesson." "She has to face herself," he sighed. "I know, but part of her misses you, even if she'll never admit it." That night I dreamed about her, not as the woman who disowned me, but as the mother who once held my hand as we crossed the street. I woke up crying, not from pain, but from release. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about deciding you won't let it own you anymore. And while she was still trapped in her own bitterness, I was finally free. But life, as it always does, had one more twist waiting, one I never could have predicted. And that moment, when fate turned the tables, became the quietest, most poetic revenge of all. The summer I gave birth was one of the warmest I can remember. The days stretched long and golden, the kind that smell like cut grass and hope. By then, Daniel and I had settled into our little house completely, the kind of home where silence didn't feel empty, just peaceful. The nursery was ready, soft yellow walls, a white rocking chair by the window, and a mobile of tiny clouds spinning gently above the crib. Everything was calm. I wanted my child to arrive in a space filled with gentleness, the very thing I never had growing up. When the contractions started, it was early morning. I remember sitting on the couch, watching the light creep in through the blinds, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. Daniel rushed around, packing the hospital bag and calling the doctor. I just sat there with my hands on my belly, whispering, "It's time, little one." After 12 long hours, our daughter, Lily, was born. The first sound she made was a soft, uncertain cry, the kind that makes your entire world shift. I looked at her tiny face and felt something indescribable. For the first time in my life, I felt unconditional love. Not the kind that had to be earned, but the kind that simply existed. Daniel cried when he held her. I think he realized it too. That everything we'd been through, all the pain, had led us to this perfect moment. The hospital room was quiet, except for the gentle hum of machines. As I looked down at Lily, I made myself a promise. I would never let her feel unworthy of love. Not once, not ever. Over the next few weeks, I lost track of time. The days melted into nights of feeding, soothing, and rocking her to sleep. Daniel took time off work, and we lived in this soft little bubble, tired, happy, and full of gratitude. Then, one afternoon, when Lily was about 3 weeks old, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice trembled slightly. "Rebecca," he said, "I heard the news. Congratulations. She sounds beautiful." "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, trying not to cry. "I wish I could see her," he said. "Your mother? Well, she doesn't know I'm calling. She's been difficult," I smiled sadly. "That doesn't surprise me." He hesitated. "She asked about the baby once. Pretended she didn't care, but I could tell. She said, 'I wonder if she looks like me.'" That caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The same woman who'd called my unborn child a disgrace was now curious about her face. "She'll never admit it," I said gently, "but part of her probably misses being part of something good." He sighed. "She's lost, Rebecca. She's angry at herself, but she won't face it." I paused, then said softly, "Maybe someday she will." After we hung up, I sat by the window, holding Lily against my chest. The sun warmed her tiny back, and I thought about how cycles either continue or end with someone's choice. I decided that in our story the cycle ended here. For months I heard nothing more. My father's calls became less frequent. Then one evening, in late October, I got an unexpected message. Not from him, but from Michael. It was short. "Mom's been diagnosed. Early stages, but it's serious. You should know." I stared at the screen, my heart strangely calm. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a deep, still sadness, the kind that doesn't scream. It just sinks. Daniel found me sitting quietly with the phone in my hand. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's my mother," I said. "She's sick." He sat down beside me. "Do you want to see her?" I thought about it. The answer wasn't simple. A part of me wanted to rush to her side, to forget everything, and just be her daughter again. But another part remembered the years of pain, the words she'd thrown at me, the way she'd chosen pride over love. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just don't know." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice. The cruel words from that Christmas dinner, mixed with memories of her younger, kinder days. My mind replayed them over and over, like two versions of her fighting for space in my heart. The next morning, I wrote her a letter. Not to send, just to release the storm inside me. "Mom," I wrote, "I heard you're sick. I don't know how to feel. Part of me wants to forgive you. But another part of me is still the little girl who never felt good enough. I hope you find peace, whatever that means for you. I've already found mine." I folded it, placed it in a box with Lily's hospital bracelet and a few ultrasound photos, and locked it away. Maybe one day I'd show it to Lily when she was old enough to understand what forgiveness really meant. A few weeks later, Michael called again. "She's asking about you," he said. "She won't say it outright, but she keeps bringing up your name. She's softer now. It's weird. I'm not ready, I said quietly. Not yet. He understood. Just don't wait too long. You might regret it. But I didn't rush. Healing doesn't come from forcing yourself into old wounds. It comes from sitting with your pain until it stops burning. Winter came again. Lily turned 6 months old. She had Daniel's eyes and my smile. She was crawling now, exploring everything with fearless curiosity. Every time I looked at her, I thought, you are proof that love can start fresh. Then, just a few days before Christmas, I got another call, this time from my father. His voice was weak. Rebecca, your mother's in the hospital. It's bad this time. I felt my heart thud. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I think she wants to see you, he added softly. I sat there, staring at the Christmas tree we'd decorated the night before. The lights flickered gently, reflections dancing on the ornaments. I thought about how a year ago, I'd been sitting in another room, facing the same woman as she tore me down over dinner. Now she was lying in a hospital bed, probably realizing too late what her words had cost her. I told Daniel, and he nodded. Whatever you decide, I'll be with you. The next morning, we drove to the hospital. The building was gray and quiet, with that sterile smell of antiseptic and sorrow. My father met us in the hallway. He looked older, frailer. She's been asking for you, he whispered. I took a deep breath and entered the room. She was lying there, smaller than I remembered, her once polished hair now thin and gray. When she turned her head and saw me, her eyes widened. Rebecca, she whispered. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with all the words we'd never said. Finally, she reached out a trembling hand. You came, I nodded. Yes, her eyes welled up. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't, I said softly. She let out a weak laugh. That's fair. There was silence again, not awkward, just full. After a while, she said, I saw the articles. The ones you wrote. I knew it was you. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. They were beautiful, she said quietly. Painful, but beautiful. That surprised me. She looked away, tears running down her cheeks. You were right, you know. I was cruel. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting my pride. I didn't know how to love you the way you needed. Hearing those words felt like watching a dam finally break. I wanted you to be like me, she continued, because I thought if you were, then maybe I hadn't failed. I swallowed hard. You didn't fail, Mom. You just forgot to love without conditions. Her eyes closed for a moment. I'm sorry, she whispered. I reached for her hand. I forgive you. She opened her eyes again, meeting mine. You have a daughter? I nodded. Her name's Lily. Her face softened. Can I see her? Daniel was standing by the door, holding Lily in his arms. He stepped closer and gently placed her next to my mother's bedside. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she reached out a shaking hand to touch Lily's tiny fingers. She's perfect, she murmured, just like you were. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as a monster or a tyrant, but as a flawed, broken human being who had spent her life trying to fill her own emptiness with control. We stayed for an hour. We didn't talk much after that. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic music. Just quiet forgiveness. When I left, I kissed her forehead and said, Merry Christmas, Mom. She smiled faintly. Merry Christmas, my love. That was the last time I saw her. A week later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. I cried that night, not for the woman who had hurt me, but for the one who had finally let herself be human. After the funeral, I received a sealed envelope from her lawyer. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, Rebecca, I've changed my will. There's nothing grand in it, just a few things that mattered to me, but I wanted you to have the music box your grandmother gave me. It plays Silent Night. You used to love it as a child. I hope you'll play it for Lily and tell her that her grandmother was difficult, but she loved deeply, even when she didn't know how to show it. Love. Mom. That night, I opened the music box. The melody was soft, delicate. I held Lily close as it played, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of my mother, just peace. My revenge had never been about hurting her. It had been about freeing both of us from the endless cycle of pain and pride. And somehow, in the quietest way imaginable, I had won. When the new year arrived, it came quietly. There was no loud celebration, no champagne, no fireworks in my world. Just me on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of herbal tea as snowflakes drifted across the silent neighborhood. Life had slowed down in a way that felt healing. I was learning to enjoy my own company again, something I had lost long before that Christmas night. I spent the first few weeks of January preparing for motherhood. I went to prenatal appointments, started reading parenting books, and even joined a small local group for single mothers. It wasn't something I ever imagined I'd do, but being surrounded by women who had endured rejection, abandonment, and judgment gave me courage. They laughed through their pain, spoke gently to one another, and carried hope in ways that inspired me. It was in those meetings that I realized revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living peacefully, thriving, and letting your absence speak louder than your presence ever could. Still, the ache of my mother's words lingered. "You're dead to me." That sentence had been echoing in my mind for weeks, like an invisible bruise that refused to fade. I didn't want to hate her. I didn't even have the energy for that. What I wanted was understanding. Why could a mother reject her own daughter so cruelly? The answer came unexpectedly. One evening, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in a while. My cousin Emily. She and I used to be close when we were kids. But over the years, my mother's control and distance had kept us apart. Her message was simple. "Rebecca, I think you should know what's happening back home." I hesitated before replying. "What do you mean?" Emily sent a long paragraph. She told me that my mother had been struggling financially ever since my father passed away. She had been trying to maintain the image of a perfect upper-middle-class life, the decorated house, the charity events, the social status. But underneath it all, she was drowning in debt. Apparently, she had been using the inheritance money as leverage, threatening to cut off anyone who didn't obey her, including me. She thought she could control everything, Emily wrote. But people are starting to see through her. After that Christmas scene, a lot of the family turned away. They said she went too far. Reading those words didn't bring joy. Instead, it brought a strange, quiet sadness. My mother was a woman trapped by her own pride, someone who would rather destroy relationships than admit weakness. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt pity. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that Christmas gift. The small box I had left under the tree. Inside that box, I had placed something simple, something symbolic. A family photo. It was taken years ago, back when things were good. My father's arm around my mother, me as a teenager sitting beside them, smiling. On the back of that photo, I had written one sentence. "You may erase me from your will, but you can never erase what we were." Emily told me what happened after I left. My mother had opened the box in front of everyone, expecting something dramatic or defiant. Instead, she found that old picture, and for a few moments she went completely still. Then she screamed, not in rage but in something deeper, something that sounded like regret breaking loose after years of being buried. She had kept that scream inside her for too long. Apparently, she threw the photo across the room and locked herself in her study for hours. Nobody dared to follow her. When I heard that, I felt a quiet release, like the story had already begun to end itself. Weeks turned into months. My pregnancy progressed gently, and I began to feel little flutters of movement, tiny reminders that life was still continuing, despite everything that had happened. I started journaling daily, writing letters to my unborn child. In one of them I wrote, "I don't know what kind of grandmother your mom's mom will be, but I promise you this. You will always be wanted, always loved, and always enough." It was both a vow and a healing act. By April, I had found a rhythm. Work was steady, and though my finances were tight, I had learned to live modestly and wisely. My small apartment had slowly transformed into a cozy home. Light curtains, a rocking chair, a bookshelf full of stories waiting to be read to tiny ears. But life, as always, had another turn waiting. One morning, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, the kind my mother used for formal invitations. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Rebecca, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to see you. Please." Mom. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at that note. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away, but another part, the part that still remembered her hands braiding my hair before school, her perfume when she hugged me after dance recitals, couldn't ignore it. After a few hours, I made a decision. I would go, but not for her, for me, to close the circle. The next weekend I drove to her house, the same one that used to be the center of every family gathering, every memory, every argument. It looked the same from the outside, but as soon as I stepped in, I noticed the difference. The grandness was fading. The carpets were worn, the air heavy with silence. She was sitting by the fireplace, smaller than I remembered. Time had taken something from her. Maybe pride, maybe peace. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears immediately. "Rebecca," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "Hi, Mom," I replied, my voice calm, steady. We stood there for a long moment. Neither of us knew how to start. Finally, she broke the silence. I was wrong," her voice cracked. "I said things I can't take back. I thought I was protecting our family's image, but I ended up destroying it. I was so afraid of losing control, I lost everything that mattered." I didn't rush to comfort her. I just listened. Her words spilled out, apologies tangled with guilt, explanations that came too late. When she finally stopped, I said quietly, "You hurt me deeply, but I think you've hurt yourself even more." She nodded, tears streaming freely now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "I didn't come here to forgive or to punish," I said. "I came because I don't want to carry this pain anymore." For the first time, she smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. "You're stronger than I ever was." There was a long silence. Then, she said something that caught me off guard. "Rebecca." I kept the photo, the one from the box. "It's on my nightstand now." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. Before I left, she handed me another envelope. "You don't have to open it now," she said. When I got home, I placed it on my kitchen table. For days I avoided it. I didn't want to know what it was. I had already made peace in my heart. I didn't need more drama. But one quiet evening, curiosity won. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a legal document. The letter read, "Rebecca, I've changed my will. Not because I think it will fix anything, but because I finally understand what truly matters. This time, it's not about control. It's about love. The kind I should have shown you long ago. Whatever I leave behind, I want it to go to you and your child. You are my legacy, even if I was too blind to see it before. Love, Mom." I folded the letter slowly, feeling a strange mix of peace and sorrow. That night, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall again, just like that first night after everything happened, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been the gift in the box. Forgiveness was. By showing her a mirror of her own cruelty through love and restraint, I had given her something far heavier to carry than anger, reflection. And maybe in that, both of us had finally been freed. Still, I couldn't help but think of that night when she had screamed, holding the photo in her hands. Maybe that was the sound of her realizing how far she had fallen, and how far she needed to climb to become human again. I smiled softly, resting my hands on my growing belly. My sweet one, I whispered. We've already broken the cycle, and that night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. The day my daughter was born was quiet, almost sacred in its simplicity. The hospital room was dimly lit, the air filled with the rhythmic hum of machines and the occasional soft footsteps of nurses. When I held her for the first time, the world outside seemed to disappear. All the noise, the judgment, the old wounds, everything melted into silence. I named her Grace. It felt right, because Grace was what had carried me through everything. In the months that followed, life settled into a gentle rhythm. My days became a mix of sleepless nights, diaper changes, soft lullabies, and unexpected tears of joy. I wasn't perfect at motherhood. No one is. But I was learning. And every time I looked at Grace's tiny fingers curling around mine, I felt an unspoken promise form inside me. She will never feel unwanted. She will never question if she belongs. I thought of my mother often during those early months. Not with bitterness anymore, but with something quieter. Curiosity, maybe even compassion. I wondered if she had ever felt this kind of love when she held me for the first time. Did she ever whisper promises in the dark the way I did to Grace? Or did life, pride, and fear change her before she could keep them? It was around Grace's 3rd month that I heard from her again. A handwritten note arrived one morning, delivered by a neighbor who said my mother had dropped it off herself. I hadn't seen her since that awkward, emotional meeting months earlier. The note was short. Rebecca, if it's not too late, I'd like to meet my granddaughter. I understand if you say no, but I had to ask. Mom. I stared at that note for a long time. Part of me wanted to protect the little world I had built. Small, safe, peaceful. I didn't want chaos creeping back in, but another part of me, the one that had learned to forgive, whispered that maybe this was another step toward healing. A week later, I invited her over. When the doorbell rang, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Grace was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of new life. I opened the door to find my mother standing there, holding a bouquet of soft pink roses, my favorite kind. She looked older than before, smaller too, as if guilt had been quietly eating away at her edges. Hi, I said softly. She smiled, nervous, uncertain. Hi, may I come in? I nodded and stepped aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes scanning every corner. The baby swing, the framed ultrasound photo on the wall, the soft toys scattered across the couch. It's beautiful here, she said. Thank you. For a few moments, silence stretched between us. Then I gently picked up Grace from her crib and turned toward her. Mom, this is your granddaughter, Grace. Something in her face shifted, a tenderness I hadn't seen since I was a child. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. She reached out but stopped herself halfway as if afraid to ask. Can I? Yes, I said, placing Grace carefully in her arms. The moment she held her, the dam inside her broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks freely, falling onto Grace's blanket. She whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology. And for the first time in a very long time, I saw my mother not as the cold, controlling woman I had known, but as a fragile human being who had made terrible mistakes and was finally trying to atone for them. She's perfect, she whispered. I nodded. She is. We sat there for a while, quietly. The air between us had changed. There was no accusation, no defensiveness, just 2 generations of women holding the beginning of a third. After a while, she said softly, You know, I look at her and I see you. I see the little girl who used to sing Christmas songs in the kitchen while I was decorating the tree. I smiled faintly. That feels like a lifetime ago. It was, she said, and I ruined so much of what came after. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope, one day, you'll remember me with a little kindness. I already do, I replied, surprising even myself with how true it felt. She stayed for a few hours, just talking, about my father, about her regrets, about how loneliness had crept into her house like an old ghost after he died. When he was gone, she said, I didn't know who I was without him. I tried to keep everything in control, and in doing that, I lost everyone I loved. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Sometimes, the greatest act of revenge, or maybe mercy, is simply letting someone speak their own truth out loud. As the afternoon light began to fade, she stood up reluctantly. I should go. I don't want to overstay. I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned to me. Rebecca, thank you for letting me hold her. Goodbye, Mom, I said. She smiled softly. Not goodbye, just see you soon? I nodded. After she left, I sat down on the couch, holding Grace against my chest. I thought about how far we had come, from that awful Christmas dinner to this moment of quiet reconciliation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. Weeks went by, and my mother began to visit more often, slowly, cautiously. She never overstayed, never assumed, never demanded. She brought books for Grace, sometimes homemade food for me. I began to see her not as the villain of my story, but as someone who had spent her whole life afraid of losing control, and in the process, had lost love instead. The first Christmas after Grace's birth came quietly. I wasn't planning anything big, just a small dinner at home with a few close friends. But a few days before Christmas Eve, my mother called. Would you and Grace maybe come here this year? She asked hesitantly. No one else will be here. Just us. I hesitated. My mind went back to that night a year ago. The laughter that had turned to shouting. The way her voice had cut through the air like a knife. You're not in the will anymore. But then I thought of the woman who had held my baby with trembling hands, crying quietly into her blanket. We'll come, I said. Her voice broke slightly with relief. Thank you, sweetheart. When Grace and I arrived that Christmas Eve, the house looked different. Smaller somehow. Simpler. There were no extravagant decorations, no fancy dinnerware, no polished speeches to impress anyone. Just a tree, softly lit, and the smell of freshly baked cookies, the kind she used to make when I was little. She greeted us at the door with open arms. Merry Christmas, Rebecca. Merry Christmas, Grace. Grace giggled, her first Christmas laugh, and reached out for her grandmother. We had dinner together, just the three of us. It was quiet, peaceful, and strangely full of love. After dinner, she brought out a small box. My heart froze for a second. That same shape, that same size as the one I had left behind a year ago. Before you panic, she said gently, smiling, this isn't what you think. It's just something I wanted to give you. I opened it slowly. Inside was a silver locket. On one side, a tiny picture of baby Grace. On the other, a picture of me as a child, smiling in my mother's arms. Engraved inside were the words, to Grace, from the women who learned love the hard way. My eyes filled instantly. She reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for teaching me, Rebecca. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for taking it. That night, after putting Grace to sleep, I stood by the window looking at the quiet snowfall. The same window I had looked through a year earlier, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Revenge, I realized, had never been about making her suffer. It was about showing her the cost of her cruelty without becoming cruel myself. It was about letting her see what love looked like. Calm, patient, unyielding in its dignity. She had screamed once when she saw that photo, a scream born from guilt and loss. But now, she smiled when she looked at pictures of Grace. That transformation wasn't dramatic or loud. It was slow, gentle, and complete. And maybe that's what true revenge looks like. Not destruction, but redemption. Months later, after Grace's first birthday, my mother grew ill. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, like everything else that had happened between us. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, holding that same silver locket in her hands. At her funeral, I stood there with Grace in my arms, surrounded by people who once judged me, pitied me, or turned away. I felt no bitterness, only gratitude. For the lessons, for the pain, for the chance to end the story differently. When everyone left, I stayed behind. I placed a single pink rose on her grave and whispered, "You found peace, Mom." And so did I. Then I turned and walked away, the soft snow crunching under my boots, Grace's tiny hand clutching my coat. Sometimes revenge isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. You hold it up, and the person who hurt you finally sees themselves. And maybe, if they're lucky, they change. That's what I learned. That's what I lived. And that's what I share here with you. Not just as a story of anger, but as a story of calm revenge. If this story touched you, if you believe that peace can be stronger than rage, then I invite you to stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge, where we remind the world that sometimes the softest voice carries the deepest power.